Hey everybody, this is Jordan from Serendipity OA, and in today's video I am going to discuss how I personally determine how many of an item that we should be purchasing for a initial purchase on new SKUs that we don't have any prior sales data for. So I have had a lot of people ask questions about this because they don't know how many of an item they should be purchasing off of the hop. So in a lot of cases, it's going to be dependent on how confident you are with the data that you see and how much overall capital that you have. There is no shame, especially when you're first starting, doing a test purchase of, 6, 12, 24 units, depending on the buy cost. But you want to also ensure that you are looking at the actual data to ensure that you're not purchasing too many of an item. And this video is intended to show you how to look at the proper sales data and to help you make informed purchasing decisions. So in this video, we're not going to discuss things like profit margin, ROI, sales volume, things like that. Everyone has their own requirements when it comes to those factors for every listing. In this one, we're just going to strictly discuss how I determine how many of an item we are going to purchase. So if we look at this item here, say we determine that this item is going to cost us $5. It's coming from our wholesaler. Say I looked at it initially here, everything looks pretty interesting. It's a 3-pack. BSR looks interesting. We know that we can't rely on estimated sales from any software in Canada. So that includes SellerAmp, Jungle Scout, Helium 10, etc. We know that none of them are really accurate in Canada. SellerAmp does tend to get the closest because they are jacked right into Keepa's database. They pull their information directly from Keepa rather. But again, we cannot rely on this information. And this listing right here is going to be a good example of that. So say I determine that this is an item that we potentially want to purchase. Now I need to determine how many that I should be purchasing. So when I do that, I come down here onto Keepa. I go into the data tab, I go into the offers tab on Keepa, and then I filter by prime and include historical offers. So I can kind of get a big overview of what's happening with other FBA sellers' stock. And this is mainly what I use to determine how many items we should be purchasing. So for us in our personal business, since inventory limits or restock limits have hit a couple years ago, we have been trying to run a fairly lean inventory of about 30 days at a time. We have noticed from past experience that does tend to be what Amazon prefers. And if you are running a lean inventory of about 1 month at a time, that tends to help your IPI, your sell-through rate, your inventory turn rate, and helps you increase your overall inventory limits. Obviously, that has changed effective today, March 1st. Amazon has changed some things, but we are going to continue with that business model for us personally going forward. It just seems to be a better overall business model. It's a little bit more involved, but it does seem that that is what Amazon prefers. So for us personally, we are looking at stocking about 30 days worth of inventory at a time. So I would look to see what people are selling on average in a month. A couple additional things to keep in mind are if a seller has their inventory limited or a maximum purchase quantity on their inventory, Keepa would not give us accurate information for those sellers. So for example, if this seller here had a maximum order limit of 5 on their inventory, Keepa would not give us a accurate representation of what their stock is, because in most cases, Keepa cannot track a seller's stock if they have a purchase limit on that inventory. And also, if a seller is selling prime from out of country, so we would typically see this in Canada for people who are prime, who are on the NARF program and are able to ship their items from the US into Canada. When we see those sellers, we also cannot rely on that information as well because the stock is shared between Canada and the US. So when we look at a seller that has inventory in the US and we look at their stock on Keepa, it is showing us their stock levels for both marketplaces. So we cannot rely on that information either because it's more likely that they are making those sales in the US itself. So when we look at this listing here, we can see that the current buy box price is a regular Canadian FBA seller and they're selling their inventory at $36.99. If we dig a little bit deeper into some additional sellers, we can see that there are some FBM sellers based from the US, or they're not shipping Prime anyway. And then when we come down here, we see that there are a couple sellers that are Prime sellers, but they're being shipped from outside of Canada. Chances are they are in the US. So these couple sellers that we see here, we probably cannot rely on their stock data to make informative purchasing decisions. So we can see that Chance Commodities is one and Happiness Everything is another one. So in this case here, we can see that Happiness Everything is here, and they have an estimated sales in the last 30 days of 27 units. We can't factor that into our sales data. And the other one was, excuse me, Chance Commodities. So that's another one right here. So again, it estimates that they've sold 19 units in the last 30 days. So again, that is not one that we can factor into our sales data. So those are ones that I would exclude. So for this particular listing here, it looks like we actually only have one actual Canadian FBA seller on this listing, and their name is Canada Web Store. So for this one, I find Canada Web Store. It looks like they have just recently hopped on this listing. So yeah, last seen 30 minutes ago, first seen 5 days ago. So right now this seller has 36 units in stock, but they don't have any sales data. They haven't sold any. So this would be an item that I would actually pass on right now, because this listing as well, I've already looked at it, doesn't have any reviews for this particular variant. So as of right now, I cannot prove any sales on this listing whatsoever. So this is an item I would actually personally pass on. I may add it into a watch list, a spreadsheet watch list, and check it, a few weeks or a few months down the road, just to see if anything has changed. But for as of right now, this is an item that looks like it could be viable at the surface of things, but actually in reality, it doesn't look like it really moves at all. So this would be an item that I would personally pass on. So we look at our next example here. So this is just a Lego set here. It looks like it may be interesting. It doesn't look like it sells a ton. It has a kind of a high BSR for toys in Canada, but we're going to use this listing for my way of how we would determine how many we would purchase. So say this is a retired Lego set. Say we have a decent source for this one where we pick these guys up for 20 bucks. So it's a pretty decent profit margin. So again, we would come down here, we go through the same process. All these FBA sellers on this listing are currently Canadian sellers. So basically what the process would be is I would look to see how many sellers are on the listing, how many on average the listing is selling per month, add me as an additional seller, and then I can determine how many I should be purchasing. So right now, if we look down here at the stock data, we can see that there's actually only one FBA seller that is competitive. There are a couple other FBA sellers that are within the range, but I would not guesstimate that they would win the buy box. So we can see that there's only one seller right now that looks like it is competitive. So if we came on this listing, we would be seller number 2. So in this case, the current seller here is YB Choice. We can see overall with this listing, it looks like it sells maybe 3-4 units per month. So nothing too crazy. So say we estimate that this listing sells about 4 units per month. That would make us seller number 2. So we would simply take 4 units per month divided by the amount of sellers, so 2 sellers. So we would estimate on this listing that we ourselves would personally sell about 2 units per month. So in this case, if it met my sales volume criteria, my profit criteria, etc., this would be an item that I would typically only purchase about 2 units. And again, with the way that this process works, I would scale it up to any listing that I look at. So whether the listing looks like it sells 2 units per month or it looks like it sells 1,000 units per month, I would do the exact same process. So if this item looked like it sold 1,000 units per month and there were currently 5 competitive FBA sellers on this listing, what I would do is I would calculate, okay, I'm going to be seller number 6. It looks like it sells reasonably about 1,000 units per month. So I would take 1,000 units divided by 6 sellers, because I will be competitive seller number 6. So then for 1 month worth of inventory, I would want to ideally purchase about 166 units or so. So if your budget can afford that, you may want to look at that is what your initial test buy is going to be. If the sales data looks solid, if there aren't huge fluctuations in the keepa price, if you are a brand new seller and you come across a listing like that, maybe you only want to purchase 24 units off the hop. So you buy 24 units, you send it in, and then you look to see how long it takes for those units to sell. So say you send in the 24 units, and from the time it hits the warehouse to the time you're completely sold out, say it took you, I don't know, 4 days to sell those units. So you take 24 units divided by 4, and so on average that means that you would be selling 6 units per day. So then you can take that 6 units times by 30, and then you have a real adjusted sales data of about 180 units. So then you can estimate again that you'd sell about 180 units per month. So then you may want to just slowly work up to that number if you're not super confident with the listing, how to read listings, things like that. So maybe your next test purchase, maybe you want to purchase 48 or 60 units. Send those in, see how they do, confirm your sales data again, and then start sending a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And that is exactly the process of what we would use to determine how many of an item that we should be selling on any individual listing. So again, this is to get initial sales data. Once we are actually selling the item and we can actually see how many units are actually selling, we would go into our account, we would take the information on how many are actually selling per day, and then we would determine based on that information how many we should be sending in, or how many we are actually going to be selling every 30 days, and that is the amount of units that we would be sending in. So I hope that this helps you. This is again a pretty straightforward cut down version on how we would determine how many we're going to sell, but this is the exact process that we would use, and I hope that you can use information in your personal business to make better buying decisions.